Joining me now is David Limbrick, Libertarian Party MP from Victoria. David, welcome. What do you think Sutton's legacy for Victoria will be?
I don't think we've had a reckoning yet to determine whether these actions were actually beneficial or not. Like there's, you pointed out the playground closures. I could point out many examples where they shut down the schools to stop transmission because they thought that, they treated children like they were disease vectors. I'm concerned about the way that mandates have undermined public confidence and trust in public health. And many of these things just haven't been looked at to see whether they were good decisions. And the ones that we have looked at, such as the housing tower lockdown, which was looked at in detail by the Victorian Ombudsman, she determined that it was a clear breach of human rights. I think that it's before these people shuffle on to whatever they're doing next in the world, there needs to be a serious reckoning for all this, and that's why we've been calling for a Royal Commission for years now. But this was promised by the incoming by the Labor Party when they before they came into the last election, but it appears that both sides of politics are, very quiet on this. I don't think that they want a close look at what went down during the pandemic because they might not come out of it looking so good.
It's madness not to learn, though, from what were an extraordinary set of circumstances and a whole bunch of new approaches, good or bad, that were tried out. Any kind of approach to learning and continual improvement necessitates this, in my view. But we can and should make fun of Sutton in many ways. But we have to remember it was our elected politicians that happily signed off on every idea he seemed to have, whether or not it was supported by the evidence available at the time. What do we need to learn about that in terms of our wider democratic system?
Well, I've said many times, I think that the way that the pandemic orders were working pre the pandemic bill, when they were using the emergency powers, was an absolute nightmare. Like they didn't publish any of their human rights assessments, any of the underlying science. It was just trust the experts. There was zero transparency on anything. And then when they did start publishing stuff in early 2022, when we had the new legislation and we saw their summary justifications, my evaluation of them was that they were very, very weak, and some of the science was, experimental at best. So the facts and the science that they were basing many of these decisions on, it's still a mystery to many people. And in many cases, they were meant to weigh it up against the human rights impacts of these things. And when they investigated that in the housing tower lockdown, some of these human rights assessments that they're meant to do, they just said, oh, it's a mental process. They didn't even document it. So I have serious concerns about many aspects of what they did. You're right, we need to learn from this because sooner or later there's going to be another pandemic, and we have to know what actually worked and what didn't. And as well, like these people are moving on to other positions and things like this. Do we even know, how much human rights were actually breached here? Are these people actually going to be good public servants in other areas through working for government? I think that we don't know the answer to that until we've looked at it in detail.
Yeah, I think that's fair. What do you think the likelihood is that we will ever get a Royal Commission?
Well, look, I think it'll come sooner or later. I'd like it to be sooner rather than later. This, as I say, people are moving on, politicians are moving on, and no one wants to talk about it. I would be very disappointed if the government waited until pretty much everyone who had anything to do with the pandemic was gone before they investigated it. That would be an outrageous turn of events. Everyone knows that when you're analysing an event, the distance in time between the event and when you analyse it makes it more and more and more difficult. I think we need to analyse it as soon as possible to get the best view of what we can. Even now, I would say it's too late. It should have happened as soon as the emergency powers ceased. They should have immediately had a Royal Commission to look at what went down. That hasn't happened, but we need to do it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's an orthodox principle of the law of evidence that says you want to collect it as fresh and as close to the time at which it was produced as possible. And the longer you wait, the more witnesses you lose, the more documents get lost, and so forth. But the idea that we would go into the next chapter of Australian public policy without critically looking at things like, does what we did in the name of health during COVID stack up against the number of, undiagnosed cancers and mental health problems and isolation-based suicides or people pushed to the edge from the economic impact of mandates and so forth. We haven't even had that cost-benefit analysis, and it's really quite unacceptable. But can I commend you, David Limbrick, not just for spending your time with me tonight, but for your consistency on this issue over a long period of time. Keep it up.
Thank you.